So, good morning, everyone. Today we will be talking about lesson 4, which is about the globalization and the economy. So, in the past lessons, for lesson 1, we discussed about the contemporary world as a course or as a subject. In lesson 2, we discussed about the contemporary man, the contemporary Filipino man in the contemporary world. While in lesson 3, we discussed about the globalization and the trend in secularization. So, lesson 4 will be the last lesson regarding or unit 1 or module 1. So, we will be talking about the economics. So, if you remember in your grade 9, you talked about the economic system. So, we will review about them to further understand economics as a major player in globalization. So, what is an economic system? So, it is a way for communities or governments to coordinate and distribute capital, services, and products across a geographical or the world. An economic system is basically a way for the people to manage their resources. So, how are they going to consume them or how are they going to trade them? The economic system regulates the factors of production. These includes the land, capital, labor, and the physical resources. An economic system is one system that encompasses many institutions like the government and other agencies or entities. In the economic system, it involves for the decision making of the key players like the businessmen and other business entities, and it also oversees the patterns of consumption that compromises the economic structure of a given community. The behavior of the consumers are also observed when we talk about or when we study economic systems. There are four types of economic systems, so each has its own distinguishing characteristic. There are other types of economic systems, but it is narrowed down into four basic economic systems. So, each economy functions based on a unique set of conditions and assumptions. Economic systems can be categorized into four. These are the traditional economic system, the mixed economic system, command economies, and market economies. The first one is the traditional economic system. So, this economic structure is focused on the exchange of goods, services, and labor, all of which follow well established patterns. So, it is heavily reliant on individuals with no division or of labor or specialization. So, if you remember back in the days, the traditional economic system would be seen in hunting and gathering societies. The traditional economy is in essence, this one is the most simple and oldest of the four types. Although the traditional economy is somehow outdated, some parts of the world still functions or still uses this economic system. So it is commonly found in the rural settings or in second and third world countries, where economic activities are yung mga predominantly about farming and other traditional income generating activities. Traditional economies rely heavily on the agriculture, fishing, and hunting. And instead of using a currency like a bill or coins, they use barter. So emerging markets and developing countries are home to the majority of those conventional economies. They are often mga countries that are found in Africa, Asia, Latin America, and the Middle East. Those are the countries or nations that still practices traditional economic system. Another one would be command economic system. So in this system, there is a powerful or centralized body that typically oversees or is in charge of a large portion of the economy. This is also known as a planned system, and it is typical in communist societies since Output decisions are made by the government. The main overseer of the economic conditions is the government. The countries that practices CES are those countries like Cuba, Russia, and North Korea. So as we know, these countries are the leadership there is heavily influenced by communism. The command structure functions well in principle as long as the central authority maintains power in the best interest of the general public. Whether the economy fails or not, it will always be reflected on the actions of the government. So if the government is functioning based on the best interest of its people or its recipients, then it will succeed. So, however, this is not the case now because most command economies are very rigid or they are not susceptible to change. So, when things like or problems like depression or recession in the economy happens, they are most likely to be flexible to changes. So when these economic crises or emergencies arises, they cannot or they won't quickly adapt or adjust to these conditions. So that's a downside of the command economic systems. Another one is the market economic system. So compared to command economic system in MES, the government plays very little or a minor role only in the economy. So the government has little influence over capital and avoids interfering with important economic sectors. Rather than that, people and the supply-demand relationship are the sources of those controls. According to some scholars, the majority of the market economic structure is theoretical only. That is to say, there is no such thing as a pure market mechanism. So how is it that they say that MES is mostly theoretical? So all economic structures now is, after all, are subject to some kind of central authority or intervention. Many states, for example, pass legislation to restrict their fair trade and monopolies. There are no other authorized body or entity that could intervene when it comes to economic activities rather than the government. So, in time, the government should still oversee those trade policies and other policies involving the economy. So, here are some example of government intervention. One is the government can stabilize prices, set minimum wages, or provide subsidies. Government subsidies are those aids that are given by the government in order to promote the public welfare. Governments interfere in markets in an attempt to correct market failure. The government may also try to improve resource distribution, so for greater equality. And then in turn, the government may subsidize goods with positive externalities, for example, public transport or education. So as what I'm saying for public transport and education are those that promotes the welfare of the public. Although there is also a disadvantage when it comes to market economic system. Its greatest disadvantage is that market economy is it enables private companies, especially those with valuable resources, to amass significant economic power. The MAS missed to regulate these type of resources that are in the hands of some big or major economic players. An example of these would be monopolies. Since those who prosper economically control majority of the wealth, the distribution of resources is inequitable. So a lot of people will suffer if the resources are unevenly distributed, especially those from the people from the lower class. Another type of economic system is the mixed system. Taken from its name, the feature of market and command economic systems are combined in mixed economic systems. So the term is often used to describe an economic environment that is heavily regulated. As a result, mixed systems are often referred to as dual systems. So remember that the command economic system is the economic system which is heavily controlled by the government, while the market system is that in which the government has little influence. So here are the countries that practices mixed economic system. These are Iceland, Sweden, and France. So a mixed method is used by many countries in the developed Western Hemisphere. The majority of industries are private, while the remainder, mostly public services, are under government control. Most countries now that practices mixed economic systems are those from the European countries, as we have our example here, Iceland, Sweden, and France. Most industries now are owned by private individuals or corporations, while the rest, especially the public services, for example, the transportation, is owned by the government, owned or controlled by the government. So in mixed economies, on the other hand, face the challenges of seeking the right balance between free markets and government regulation practices. Since they are mixed, often they will collide. So globally mixed systems are the standard. A mixed system is said to incorporate the best aspects of both business and command systems. So government have a tendency to exert much more power than is needed. Economic systems are mostly practiced by a lot of countries, not just in the European countries. It is a norm because the government will try to intervene in making policies, but also most parts of the economy will also try to function on their own without the intervention of the state or their government. After discussing market economies, we also have here words to define to further understand the economy as a major player of globalization. So the first word is about free market. It is somewhat similar to the idea of the traditional economic system. So it is one in which supply and demand rather than the state controls the production and the labor. So in the free market, people can really trade on their own with little intervention from the state or the government. Another word is capitalism. It is commonly used in economic structure in which this means the production are owned by private individuals. So the desire to make a profit is fundamental characteristic of capitalism. Most of the economic players, these private individuals, their main goal is to make a profit. So most of their actions are based on whether they will make a gain or not. Another word is neoliberalism, which is a trend in globalization also. So it is a term that is commonly used to describe market-oriented reform policies such as removing price controls, deregulating capital markets, lowering trade barriers, and reducing state influence in the economy, especially through privatization and austerity. So neoliberalism is making new in order to reduce the influence or the power that the government has over these types of economies or businesses. So in neoliberalism, it will also include the idea of deregulation and privatization. So what do we mean by deregulation? So it is the process now of eliminating government regulations and laws from a sector. So the term deregulation usually refers to the removal of regulatory obstacles to competition. An example of regulatory obstacles to competition would be monopolies or state-owned industries. So by deregulation, we mean to eliminate these types of competition because in time we have learned that monopolies can also have a lot of disadvantages when we try to pursue economic gains in the long run. So the regulation was frequently followed by privatization during this period. Privatization, it is the process of transferring ownership, property, or a company from the government to the private sector. So the entity or corporation is no longer owned by the government. So you might confuse the regulation with privatization, but the regulation is somehow or somewhat the process to eliminate or lessen or eliminate the control of the government on economies or business sectors. While privatization is more specific, this one is when, for example, the government owns the private transportation or the government-owned businesses are parang tina-transfer to an individual or a corporation. In turn, we will also be talking about the 9/11 impact on the global economy. So, what do we mean by the 9/11 impact and what how is it important to the global economy? So, if you know, the 9/11 usually refers to the September 11, 2001 attacks that happened in the USA. It was when a group of terrorists called Al-Qaeda hijacked parang four airplanes, and then two of those planes hit the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in New York City. So another of one of those hijacked planes hit out. Third plane hit the Pentagon just outside of Washington D.C., their capital. And then the fourth one, it crashed over a field in Pennsylvania. So over 3,000 people have died during the 9/11 attack. So how does this one single attack on a single day affected the economies globally? So in the intermediate aftermath of the 9/11 terrorist attacks on America, major economic damage occurred, reverberating across global financial markets. So a lot of things had happened after those attacks. So the US also tried to tighten their military forces. Another thing is that airlines and insurance firms took the brunt of the damage right away, with stock markets in the United States down more than 10% in the days following. And then, mas lalo pa siyang bumaba after those times. An example of those effect on global economies would be the trading between US and the Canada. So after the 9/11 attacks, in the third quarter of the 2001, by about US exports to Canada fell by about 8% compared to the before the pre 9/11 era. And also, imports from Canada fell from 3%. So malaki-laki rin yung binaba ng export and import nila to and from Canada. And a lot of countries, not just Canada, had also been affected by the 9/11 attacks. So the economies took a toll after those terrible attacks, horrendous attacks. After that also, the US also parang nag-decide sila na to tighten their military forces after those attacks. And then, of course, mas marami silang pinokos na spending sa kanilang military. And also, I would like to ask to tell if you're actually listening to these lectures. How old were you during the 9/11 attacks? Remember, this is on September 11, 2001. I want you to comment how old were you during these times on the comment section of the FB post that I will be attaching this content video on. So, for example, me, I was 2 years old when these attacks happened. So please comment down your answers on the Facebook post. So after discussing the market economies, the 9/11 attacks, we will now move on to market globalism. So when we say market globalism, this refers to globalization with an aiming ideology of the powerful elite of the global north to deregulate markets. So remember, when we say deregulation, this is getting away from the claws of the government and other economic obstacles. So it has also tasked to liberalize trade and industry and to provide state-owned enterprises and support on war against terrorism, just like what happened to the US. So our main players here are the powerful elite. So what do we mean when we say the powerful elite? So this would include the corporate managers, the corporation executives, and the corporate lobbyists. We also have high-level military officials and other prominent persons or entities like prominent journalists and public relations specialists. So these ones, sila yung mga mainly nakaka-affect ng mga economic policies and decisions across every nations or countries. Sila yung parang mga main decision maker when it comes to the economy. So we also have here the 5 ideologies of market globalism. The first one we have globalization is global integration of markets and a neutral solution to world problems through liberalization. So globalization daw is a tool aiding world problems through liberalization. So liberalization is what we have talked about before. This is forming new economic policies and other trade policies that are or has little control of the government. So to have an authentic global order, there must be a normative and self-regulating market. So it means that the ability, rational and efficiency of free market that will bring lots of social integration and material progress will just be limited to the democratic society. That is according to this ideology. So this is because democratic values can protect individual freedom realistically. So when we say self-regulating markets, if you still remember from your economics in your high school, this is a market that adjusts rules and governs itself without outside interference or it is operating or functioning without externally imposed controls or regulations. So for example, when a recession or depression happens in an economy, or when there is surplus or scarcity, the market will try to correct itself or heal itself. That is what we mean by self-regulating market. The more a government allows the market forces to rule over another government, the more efficient that country will be, which had invested a lot on their economy. So an example of this would be when a country tries to open their economy from the outside through free trade and competition to another government. That is if there is a good conditions of trading policies. For example, the Philippines tries to trade with another country. So there has to be a clear and good trading policy conditions in order for that deal to succeed. Number 2 ideology is that globalization is inevitable and irreversible. So this means that globalization is an inevitable historical reality. Globalization is a reality that must be accepted and therefore must be embraced. Market globalism can be viewed as an ability of markets to use new technologies to solve social problems far better than the classless society. So, the more that a country has more technology to offer, the more possibility for it to succeed economically. So the second ideology is closely tied with the idea that the market is mostly driven by how much technology a certain nation or market has to offer. So we have here a map on the world's 60 most innovative economies. The first in rank is South Korea. They are vastly improving in terms of their technology, including in the top 10 are countries from the Europe, mostly from the Europe, and we also have Israel and Singapore. The USA is out of the top 10. This is a very recent study. This is from February to 2021 pa lamang. The Philippines, of course, is gray, not in the 60 most innovative economies. I am more surprised that countries from South America, such as Chile and Argentina, also Brazil, and countries like South Africa, India, are in that top 60. So I'm hoping that in the future, the Philippines would also up our game in terms of our technological advancement. So therefore, this map shows that an inevitability and irreversibility of the market globalization is in the control of these elite nations so advanced in terms of technology and market network. The third ideology is globalization is leaderless. According to Robert Hormats in 1998, the beauty of globalization is that no one is in control of it, meaning it is not controlled by a specific individual, it is not controlled by a government or a state, and not controlled by a government and even by an institution. We have here another table or graph. These people are the top 5 richest people around the world. So the first one we have Jeff Bezos for Amazon. Then we have Elon Musk for Tesla Motors and SpaceX. If you're familiar with Tesla, this is a company that develops electric cars. Then we have Bill Gates for Microsoft Corporation and Xbox Studios. We also have Bernard Arnault for LVMH, Moet Hennessy, Louis Vuitton, and we also have Mark Zuckerberg, of course, for Facebook. The source is from Bloomberg Reporting. For these 5 gentlemen here, there's a lot of impacts when it comes to our global economy. Number 4 ideology would be globalization fosters economic paradise on earth. So market globalism, according to this ideology, is there in order to improve the standards of living among the poor nations. So this picture here is taken from Gardens by the Bay in Singapore, if you're familiar with that. So this is a product of globalization and market globalism. Market globalism is there to improve the technological innovation and lastly, to proliferate the skilled jobs among developing nations. So what do we mean by proliferating skilled jobs to developing nations? So this is what we mean. So highly skilled persons from developing countries migrates to other countries to find better opportunities. So this is the table for countries by number of immigrants. The country with the highest number of immigrants is India at 16.6 million people outside of their country for employment and other purposes. And we have Mexico, Russia, China, Bangladesh, Syria, Pakistan, Ukraine, United Kingdom. On the ninth, we have, this is one of our biggest flex, Philippines at 5.7 million people outside of the country. So a lot of Filipino people, especially, so there are a lot of Filipino people that are trying to find work outside of the country. Another ideology would be globalization furthers democratization of the world. So for the globalist point of view, democracy is meant to create a market activity and it is the making of economic choices. So remember that economics is solely focused on the making of these choices. It can be regarded as a challenge to democracy because it is thought to weaken the fundamental requirements of state autonomy, patriotism, and national identity. So many claim that globalization daw is the sole cause of the nation-state's demise. So, nakaka-apekto daw negatively ang globalization sa power na hinohold ng government. So, this is the cause. So since the states no longer have power over their economies, trades, or borders. So one of the new trends in globalization is the neoliberalism, as what we have defined kanina. So neoliberalism, it focuses on making newer policies, trade policies, and other economic actions that are less likely to be influenced by the state. That is one of the disadvantages of market globalism or globalization itself. So although democracy, the practice of democracy also enhances the power of the individual to make decisions on their own. Since nga, democracy is based on the decisions of the many people para sa nakararami. Desisyon ng nakararaming tao. So it benefits that interest and goals of the many. So the conclusion would be, this phenomenon of market globalism is a part of the whole reality of globalization. So it is actually trading and marketing goods beyond the borders of its country of origin. So to justify this, marketing strategies beyond its original borders is a non-exploitative and well-agreed setting. It has to be implemented some sense of ideology. So finally, si market globalism reached a point wherein it is inevitable and irreversible reality and also being called leaderless, so that no one can be blamed from an unexpected mess and confusion, may it be political, cultural, or economic devastations. And because it is leaderless, meaning there is a collective effort of a lot of economic players, when something bad happens, there walang masisisi. No sole individual or person would take the blame. So also, when looking for solutions, there is a collective effort of many economic players to find that solution to a problem. So the way of globalization in terms of economics is that it is the collective effort and collective actions of the many economic players. So that is on about globalization and the economy. So that is the end also of Unit 1 or Module 1. So if you have any questions, you can contact me on my Facebook or Messenger account and also here in my email. So that is all for today and have a good day.